"It's for your safety, Emily," he whispered while clasping the Tiffany necklace at the Plaza Gala. I believed him for about 3 days. Then the gift started to feel like a leash. And I'm 28, an executive assistant in Manhattan, New York, working for the glossy, camera-ready CEO of Hale Ventures, an investment firm that speaks fluent buzzword. Marcus Hale is charisma in a navy suit, always on LinkedIn, talking ethical leadership, always shaking hands under hotel chandeliers. I'm the kid from a Brooklyn walk-up with student loans, a chipped mug, and a Metro card. I'm reliable to a fault. I color-code calendars, carry a spare charger, and keep a desktop folder called Fires. I wanted a stable paycheck, a clean reference, and quiet. That was the dream. Keep my head down, keep my life small. And that's where I first lied to myself. NNTHE first red flags wore compliments. He lingered after meetings and said, "You're not like the others. You get me." His cologne sat heavy in the glass conference room, mixing with the stale coffee that never leaves finance floors. The overhead lights were cold and clinical. I laughed it off because rent exists, and boundaries feel theoretical when your boss signs the checks. I told myself he was just intense, and I was lucky to be trusted. That was the moment I started minimizing. Then came the special projects. Late nights in his office while the floor emptied and the AC hummed like an airplane. I typed while he paced, jacket off, cufflinks parked on the desk like 2 small mirrors. He'd stand behind my chair and read over my shoulder, too close for comfort. "You're indispensable," he said, and the word felt sticky on my skin. I kept working, because deliverables are safer than feelings and I'm very good at deliverables. It only got worse from there. NNTHE Plaza Gala was our shiny night. Step and repeats, champagne flutes, the kind of donors who love saying impact. Marcus pulled me onto a balcony and pressed that iconic blue box into my hands. I'm not gonna lie, my throat did a stupid little lump. Tiffany Blue does that to people. He said, "A token of your irreplaceable value," and his fingers brushed my neck while the autumn air went sharp and cold. The silver chain felt cool against my skin. The pendant sat perfectly centered like it belonged there. I smiled for photos, filed it under mentorship, and told myself it was just generosity. That was the story I wanted. After the gala, the messages multiplied at odd hours. 12:41 a.m. "You heading home?" 2:07 a.m. "Big city's distracting, don't get lost." He referenced details he shouldn't know, like the barista at my Chelsea gym cafe who drew a smiley on my latte. I hadn't posted anything. This wasn't Instagram sleuthing. He called it intuition. I called it creepy in my head and careful in my replies. This is how toxic boss behavior hides, in polite replies. And that's when the anxiety moved in. And at a team lunch in Midtown, he guessed my morning route like a party trick. My coworkers laughed. Someone said, "He just knows his team." He smiled the easy CEO smile and tapped the pendant with one finger. "You always find your way back to center, Emily." The metal went suddenly cold against my skin. I told myself I was being dramatic. "You're too sensitive." He chuckled, like it was a joke. It wasn't. That was the line that lodged in my ear. The public moment hit at a client dinner at Per Se, where the napkins are softer than my bath towels and the chandeliers throw a clean, expensive light. He raised a toast at our best asset, eyes on me while investors clapped. Then he leaned close and whispered, "I always know where my best assets are." His breath was coffee and mint. My stomach dropped. I smiled for the room and swallowed for survival. Power sits at the head of the table, and I was learning its language. That was the moment I felt watched. And I went home to my roommate Sarah, a graphic designer with the kind of calm that makes you tell the truth. I set the blue box on our small kitchen island and said I might be overthinking. She didn't laugh. She flipped on the desk lamp, took the chain in her fingers and checked the clasp, the pendant, the tiny seam at the edge. Her hands were steady, mine weren't. "If this is a work gift, it needs boundaries," she said. It sounded like a joke and a warning at the same time. That was when suspicion finally won. And I'm not sharing this for a CEO affair scandal or some forbidden workplace power dynamic drama. I'm sharing it because I kept making trades. Comfort for silence, prestige for boundaries, a Tiffany box for peace of mind. And because if you've ever lived through a workplace harassment story, you know the smell of rationalization, coffee, cologne, and fear. I didn't want to be a headline. I wanted to keep the job and my sanity, like both could live under the same roof. That was the moment I admitted they couldn't. Sarah didn't let it go. She pulled a tiny screwdriver from her design kit and worked at the seam. I paced our living room, the sound of the radiator hissing like it was in on the secret. When the clasp popped open, there it was. A chip, no bigger than a fingernail, with a faint red blink. My first thought was stupid. Maybe it's decorative. My second thought was survival. And that's when I realized it wasn't intuition. It was surveillance. And Sarah loaded up a tracker app on her laptop and synced it. A map of Manhattan lit up with every stop I'd made. Chelsea Gym, my bodega on 8th. Even the corner bench where I ate a bagel in silence one morning. The timestamps matched his late-night texts. He wasn't guessing, he was watching. My stomach flipped, and the necklace suddenly weighed 5 pounds around my neck. I yanked it off and dropped it on the table. The clink was louder than it should have been. That was the moment fear became fact, and I wanted to confront him right away. March into his office, slam the necklace down, tell him to choke on his gift, but Sarah stopped me. He'll spin it, he'll say you're too sensitive. She was right. Gaslighters rehearse those lines. I needed evidence, not emotions. That was when I started documenting. Screenshots of the tracker log, his 2 a.m. texts, calendar invites that kept me trapped after hours. I saved everything twice, one on my laptop, one in a hidden drive. This was bigger than paranoia. This was my life on a hard drive. That was the moment I chose proof over panic. NNTHE, days that followed felt like acting. I wore the necklace to work like nothing had changed. The chain felt cold, and my skin prickled every time his eyes flicked to it. He'd pass my desk and say, "You always shine when you wear it." My reply was automatic, "Thanks." Inside I was screaming. The office lights buzzed overhead. Emails pinged nonstop. But all I could hear was that faint click of the clasp from the night Sarah opened it. I carried that sound like armor. It only got heavier from there. At a team brainstorming session, he brushed my shoulder when handing me a folder. "Without me, you're nothing." He muttered low enough that no one else caught it. I froze. He smiled for the room, pointer in hand, talking about quarterly returns. I sat there with my pen digging into my palm. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just a necklace. It was a leash. And I called a friend of Sarah's, an HR lawyer, in a cafe off Lexington. The place smelled like burnt espresso and printer paper. I slid my laptop across the table and showed him the logs. He scrolled, eyebrows lifting. "This isn't a gray area," he said. "This is textbook harassment, and it's traceable to his company account." My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. But then he added, "You need to be careful. He'll deny, and the board will try to bury it if they can." That was the moment I realized. The fight wasn't just with Marcus, it was with the machine that enabled him. NNSOI went careful. Anonymous complaint to the board with screenshots attached. Then another email from a burner account with app data pulled directly from Hale Ventures servers. Marcus still strutted through the office, but I saw cracks. His smile looked stretched. His suit hung looser. One evening, he called me in late. The office smelled like stale coffee. The skyline glowed neon outside. He shut the door. "I know you've been digging," he said. His voice cracked just once. "This is for your safety, Emily. You're too valuable to lose." He almost sounded like he believed it. Almost. That was when I realized his grip was slipping. I walked out that night and texted Sarah. "He knows." She replied, "Good. Means he's scared." And she was right. The next morning, I noticed whispers near the boardroom, HR looking pale, and Marcus avoiding eye contact. For the first time in months, the necklace wasn't on me. It sat at the bottom of my desk drawer, cold and quiet, and I knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. And NTHAT was the moment the hunter started to look like prey. The next week was like living in split screen. On one side, the office with its endless meetings and polite smiles. On the other, my inbox with a growing pile of evidence. Every time Marcus passed my desk, my heart kicked. But I kept my face neutral. I had to. One wrong move, and he'd spin it as insubordination or mental instability. That's the playbook for bosses like him. And that was the moment I understood just how many assistants before me had probably walked this same tightrope. NNTHE board finally replied to my anonymous complaint. Their email was polished, vague, full of, "We take these matters seriously." But I saw a flicker of panic in HR's eyes when they walked past me that morning. I'd included server logs with timestamps matched to Marcus's texts, plus screenshots of the GPS app showing my routes. Hard evidence, not anecdotes. "He can't just deny this," Sarah said, scrolling through the files again at our kitchen table. Her desk lamp cast a harsh light on the Tiffany necklace, now a piece of evidence instead of jewelry. The pendant surface reflected the glow like a tiny mirror. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just my story anymore, it was a pattern. Marcus tried a new tactic: fewer texts, more praise in public. At an internal all-hands, he gave a speech about our culture of trust while looking directly at me. People clapped. Someone even joked, he's grooming her to be VP. I smiled on cue, hands folded. Inside, I was a wire about to snap. Then he said, loud enough for the room, Emily is proof that loyalty pays off. My stomach flipped. That line sounded like a threat dressed as a compliment. It only got worse from there. NNTWO days later, he summoned me for a late client prep in his office. The skyline was dark except for taxi headlights below. The air smelled like reheated takeout. He shut the door, leaned against his desk, and said, "You've been distant. People are talking. Remember, without me, you're nothing." He let the words hang there like a smoke alarm. I kept my voice calm. "I'm here to work, Marcus." He smirked. "Good girl." I bit my tongue so hard it almost bled. That was the moment my fear solidified into anger. NNTHAT night, Sarah and I drafted a second packet for the board. This time, including a memo from my HR lawyer friend explaining how the GPS tracking violated multiple privacy statutes. We attached a copy of the necklace's serial number linked to Hale Ventures' corporate account. This wasn't just creepy, it was criminal. Once this is in, they can't bury it, Sarah said. Her voice was steady. Mine wasn't. I kept hearing his words, "This is for your safety." Gaslighting is a mission statement. That was the moment I knew the board would have to act. And they did. Quietly at first. HR interviews, routine audits, IT pulling logs. Marcus kept strutting, but his eyes darted more. He stopped making eye contact in meetings. He started canceling his evening preps with me, sending interns instead. Rumors floated. Compliance is sniffing around. Someone reported him. I stayed silent. My job was to look calm and let the net tighten. That was the moment the leash reversed direction. NNTHE public scene came at a quarterly investor dinner. Marcus was mid-toast, talking about, quote, the integrity of leadership, when an IT director entered and handed him a note. His hand trembled just slightly as he read it. He tried to keep speaking, but the room noticed. Investors glanced at each other. Someone whispered. He cleared his throat, raised his glass, and said, "To our future." His voice cracked. That was the moment everyone else started to see what I'd known all along. And I left the dinner early, texted Sarah. "It's happening." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a heart. My hands shook on the subway home, but for the first time in months, I breathed freely. The necklace was in an evidence bag in my purse. I'd touched it once, feeling the cold metal through plastic. It no longer felt like a collar. It felt like a key. And that was the moment I realized I'd already stepped out of his cage. The fallout didn't take long. Within a week, the board launched a formal investigation. They framed it as standard compliance review, but everyone in the office knew it was about Marcus. I watched the shift happen in real time. The way assistants whispered by the elevators, how middle managers suddenly stopped copying him on emails. Power is fragile. Once people smell blood, they start stepping back. And that was the moment I saw the king lose his crown. NNHR called me in for an interview. The conference room was too bright, the air too cold, the blinds pulled half shut. Two board members sat across from me, their ties neat, their questions softer than I expected. "Do you feel safe at work?" one asked. My throat went dry. I showed them the evidence, explained the tracker, pulled up the logs on my laptop. Their faces tightened, one scribbled notes, the other cleared his throat. I heard the click of my pen over and over, a nervous metronome. They thanked me for my courage in coming forward. It sounded rehearsed. Still, I walked out lighter. That was the moment I knew the truth was officially documented. Marcus didn't go quietly. He started showing up later, looking more disheveled, his once perfect ties slightly crooked. In one meeting, he snapped at a junior associate for a typo. "Without me, you'd all be nowhere," he barked, louder than intended. The room went silent. Someone coughed. Someone else stared at their notes. He laughed it off, said it was a joke, but the tension stayed. That was the moment the mask began to crumble in public. Behind the scenes, more stories surfaced. Former assistants reached out to me after hearing whispers of the investigation. One described late-night texts. Another mentioned gifts that felt more like bribes. It wasn't just me, it was a pattern. Sarah helped me organize everything into a folder labeled past accounts. Each file was a reminder that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't alone. That was the moment my fear turned into solidarity. NNTHE board eventually suspended him pending review. An email went out at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Marcus Hale will be taking a leave of absence effective immediately. No details, of course, just corporate spin. But the effect was electric. Slack channels buzzed, side eyes shot across cubicles, and the office air felt lighter. For the first time in years, people laughed without checking over their shoulders. I sat at my desk, reading the email 3 times, then minimizing the window. My hands shook, but in a good way. That was the moment I realized he wasn't untouchable. NNOF course. Marcus tried to control the narrative. He called me into his office one last time before the suspension kicked in. The space smelled like stale coffee and panic. He sat with his hands clasped, his voice low. It was never about control. It was for your safety, Emily. You're too valuable to lose. His words were hollow, practiced. His eyes, though, betrayed him, darting, desperate, clinging to any angle that might work. I didn't answer. I just looked at the necklace bag on the table between us, the blinking chip still visible through the plastic. That was the moment the silence did the talking. Within weeks, Marcus was gone. The official announcement said, mutual separation. The rumor mill said lawsuits, settlements, non-disclosures. His golden parachute evaporated. Investors pulled away, employees cheered quietly, and Hale Ventures tried to scrub his name off marketing decks. I walked past his empty office, blinds drawn, desk stripped clean. The chair looked smaller without him in it. That was the moment the leash was finally cut. At home, Sarah opened a bottle of cheap Prosecco. We toasted not to revenge, but to relief. The necklace sat on our counter one last time. I ran my fingers over the cold silver and thought about all the nights it burned my skin. Then I slipped it into a pawn shop bag the next morning. The cashier didn't blink. To him, it was just another luxury trinket. To me, it was closing a chapter. And that was the moment I knew I had taken back my freedom. Life after Marcus felt surreal, like walking out of a storm into clear daylight. For months I'd been living under fluorescent lights and coded messages, every breath tied to whether he noticed me. Now I woke up to silence. No 2 a.m. texts, no necklaces around my neck, no shadow at my desk. It took me weeks to realize that silence is what safety sounds like, and that was the moment I felt the weight truly lift. NNTHE board offered me a severance package. 6 figures, tied up in neat legal language about closure and confidentiality. I read the contract 3 times, pen tapping against the kitchen counter. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, whispering, "Take it. You earned every cent." She was right. That money meant freedom. My loans gone, my emergency fund real, my life not tied to his calendar anymore. I signed, slid the papers into the envelope, and exhaled. That was the moment I stopped surviving and started planning. NNTHE, first thing I bought wasn't fancy. It was a weekend in the Hamptons, just me, a train ticket, and a cheap Airbnb near the beach. The ocean air smelled like salt and sunscreen, and for once, no one was watching me. I walked barefoot on the sand, the wind tugging at my hair, and thought about the necklace. I imagined it sinking into the ocean, chain curling in the current, lost forever. That was the moment I realized healing sometimes looks like distance. When I got back, I started freelancing. No more boardrooms, no more corporate culture slogans, just clients, deadlines, and my own hours. I built a small routine: morning coffee from my corner shop, laptop open at a co-working space in Chelsea, evening walks without looking over my shoulder. It sounds boring, but boring felt like gold. For the first time, I wasn't somebody's asset. I was my own boss. That was the moment I reclaimed my name. People still asked about Marcus. The industry never stays quiet, and Hale Ventures couldn't bury everything. Rumors circled about settlements, about old assistants resurfacing with stories, about lawsuits hovering in the wings. I stayed out of it. I didn't want revenge headlines or a dramatic tell-all. I just wanted my story back, my timeline without his fingerprints on it. But when I heard a former colleague say, "I always thought he was too perfect," I couldn't help but laugh. That was the moment I knew masks only work until they crack. NNTHE necklace? I sold it at a competitor store on 5th Avenue. The cash wasn't even the point. It was the transaction. Turning his symbol of control into neutral bills felt like alchemy. Sarah joked we should frame one of the bills as a trophy. I didn't. I spent it on groceries, rent, and a cheap dinner at a diner that smelled like frying oil and freedom. Sometimes closure looks ordinary. That was the moment I understood. Ordinary is a gift. Looking back, I see how easy it was to excuse red flags. He's just intense. He trusts me. It's only a gift. Every excuse was a brick in the cage, and it took one blinking chip to finally break the spell. If I hadn't told Sarah, if I hadn't documented, maybe I'd still be wearing that necklace, convincing myself it meant respect. That thought still chills me. That was the moment I realized how close I'd been to staying trapped. NNSO, here I am, writing this like a confession to strangers on the internet. Not for sympathy, not for clicks, but because I know someone out there has their own gift that feels heavy. Maybe it's a necklace, a phone, a favor that doesn't feel free. You tell yourself it's fine, because confronting it feels impossible. I get it, I was there. And maybe my story is your nudge. That was the moment I knew I had to share. Because here's the question I keep circling back to. Have you ever been given something that looked like a gift, but felt like a trap? And if you discovered the truth, what would you do with it?